German journalist based here in London who writes for the Wall Street Journal. So your job is to explain to the Journal's readers what's happening here. How will you go about that?
Well, I've spent a fair bit of time recently explaining what a no-deal Brexit would mean for corporates in Europe as well as in the UK. Because, of course, from an American perspective, this is still relatively far away, even though our American readers are following this quite closely.
And is your message for Americans and Germans quite different? Because I imagine the impact will be quite different.
Well, you have the issue, of course, that American subsidiaries here in the UK face the issue that they have to make changes if there was a no-deal Brexit. So many American companies are using the UK currently as a sort of like a bridgehead into Europe. From a German perspective, there's much more, I guess, you have more voiced opinions because entrepreneurs are very worried about this issue. Should there be a no-deal Brexit? Especially car makers are saying, well, this is all adding cost and nothing adds value when it comes to no-deal Brexit planning. So I guess, yes, there's concerns on both sides of the Atlantic.
But that's interesting that it sounds like the primary concern for the corporates you cover is the possibility of a no deal rather than the possibility of Brexit.
Well, I guess Brexit is a reality that people have gotten used to for the past 2 years, even though, of course, we know that in the German press, we for a long time had this dream of like a second referendum, and people were saying, oh, well, they didn't really mean it. But I guess companies know that, yes, the UK will very likely leave the EU, and so they have made their plans. I guess the problem is a no-deal Brexit, which up until recently looked very unlikely, seems to be more likely now, and that's something which companies find difficult to prepare for because it requires a lot of paperwork, a lot of systems updates, and a lot of planning that, of course, in the end might prove unnecessary if there's not a no-deal Brexit.
And how do you go about explaining all of the political twists and turns of this story to an audience which doesn't normally follow British politics this closely?
Well, thankfully I'm covering the corporate side of it, so right. I'm always just leaving it with a paragraph or two explaining that in the end there's still no decision yet and the UK is still finding its way out of the EU, and leaving that to my politics colleagues.
But presumably it's the political uncertainty that we see day after day which is what impacts on the behaviour of big corporates because they want to know what the UK is doing.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I always hear from corporates saying, like, if they just made up their mind, knowing what they would do, they, in this case, meaning the British and the government, I think that's one of the core things that businesses find incredibly difficult to deal with.
And on the issue of no deal, we hear some Brexiteers saying the warnings about a no deal Brexit are exaggerated, that it won't be as bad as some people are saying. As you speak to big corporates in Germany and America and elsewhere, do you talk to people who agree with that, or are most people thinking this would be disastrous?
Depends, of course, on the selection of interview partners, but based on my research that I've done in the past couple of weeks, most people that I spoke to have agreed with this assessment of saying, A, it's going to be costly, we wouldn't like it, and mostly not saying that they are thinking it's going to be exaggerated. Mostly people were saying that they're very concerned about it, and also saying they're spending money that they could be spending on other things, like making their companies here more productive and inventing new things. Of course, there's a lot of money that is now diverted towards Brexit planning that would normally be spent on other things.
Thanks, Nina. Nice to see you. Appreciate it. It's Nina Trentman from the Wall Street Journal.